Hey, a quick editor's note before we start today's episode. You're going to notice Jessica and I talk about a particular price point for this game that when we recorded the episode was valid. However, as of today, April 22nd, 2024, it no longer is. Not to put the cart before the horse too much, but all of our comments regarding the price of today's game are still valid. It's just that the number is much higher now. So keep that in mind as you listen. On with the show. So this wasn't intentional in the sense of like we wanted to do some sort of rolling theme, but hey, here we are back in ancient Rome again this week.
Yeah, you know what they say, when in Rome, stay in Rome.
Is that what they say?
No,
that's
I don't,
not what
I don't
they
think
say.
that's what they say.
That's not what they say. Anyway, thank you for joining us at Beer and Bourbon Studios today. My name is Bryce. Across the booth from me is my awesome wife, Jessica. We are your Game and Drink Connoisseurs. This is the Game and Drink Connoisseurs podcast.
Today's game, as we said, takes us back to ancient Rome. It is the Downfall of Pompeii. And it's hard to describe, but in a nutshell, you are trying to escape Pompeii before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius reaches you and you die a hot, fiery, lava-filled death.
Yeah, that's a fairly brutal but accurate description. Today's drink is Pompeii IPA by Toppling Goliath. A very fitting brew for today's episode, not in just name, but also substance as well. But we'll learn a little bit more about that in just a minute.
We are also going to share with you some interesting facts. I wouldn't say fun, but definitely interesting facts about Pompeii and Mount Vesuvius. And then we're closing it out with a nice little recipe for some sliders that are supposed to go nicely with the beer.
So today's game definitely fits our criteria of games that have been out for a while, so we can re-examine them and see if they've aged like a fine whiskey. This game is the oldest one we have covered so far, having came out 20 years ago back in 2004. It keeps getting reprinted, so that might give us an indication of what people think about it overall.
It's pretty obvious if it's getting reprints that it's a well-liked game, so it'll be very interesting to dive into this one. And hey, this one is almost old enough to legally drink, so that's kind of cool.
Right. However, you and I have long since been old enough to drink. But if I'm being honest, I'm not the biggest fan of IPAs, typically.
Same. I actually feel a little fortunate that I have to medically abstain from trying it this week.
Yeah, this one's all me.
The pressure's on.
Well, the IPAs with the extra hops and stuff, it just can get kind of gross. But we've heard good things about this one, so we'll give it a try, and you never know. Might be surprised.
So Bryce is about to get started on his first round of Pompeii IPA. When we come back, we're going to take a deep dive into the downfall of Pompeii. But first, let's learn a little bit more about Pompeii IPA.
It's a good thing we're not taking shots every time one of us says Pompeii.
Pompeii is a single-hop, mildly hazy, medium-bodied Indian pale ale from the American heartland, brought to you by Toppling Goliath Brewing Company out of Decorah, Iowa. For the last 13 years, Toppling Goliath has put itself on the map by becoming one of the most talked about makers of both barrel-aged stouts and IPAs in the world. In creating the brew, Toppling Goliath was inspired by the well-preserved mosaic tiles still found on the walls of the fateful town from which it takes its name. Pompeii IPA has been brewed to be crisp, light, textured, bright, and full of character, using, surprise, surprise, only mosaic hops to do so. Yes, we're well aware that this whole episode is very much on the nose. Pompeii leans heavily on the citrusy and acidic properties of mosaic hops with a mash comprised of pineapple, mango, and flowers, along with mild but earthy malts and spices. Like all IPAs, extra hops are added at the end of the brewing phase to give the beer the characteristic body and bitterness IPAs are known for. Each pour of Pompeii will deliver a solidly light orange brew with minimal head and a full glass of light sediment that won't sink to the bottom. This gives Pompeii a lava-like look to complement the tropical aroma and volcanic namesake. To really drive home the theme, the artwork on the can is a mosaic-style volcano. With summer just around the corner, a crisp tropical beer might be exactly what you're looking for. If Pompeii has interested you at all, you'll likely be in luck. Toppling Goliath sells their beer in 30 states. And if you happen to be in the beautiful Northeast Iowa area, stop on in and check out Toppling Goliath Brewery for yourself. To learn more about Toppling Goliath and find out if Pompeii is sold near you, check out their website at tgbrews.com.
A terrible secret lies beneath the slopes of the mighty Mount Vesuvius. The mountain, so very long asleep, is finally awakening. Now you must struggle to get your compatriots out of the doomed town of Pompeii before they are engulfed. Rushing to avoid lava flows, your people must flee before Vesuvius explodes and ash seals their fate. Can you escape the inferno? The Downfall of Pompeii is a strategic movement and placement game that can be found online for around $45. It is designed for 2 to 4 players, plays in around 45 minutes, and is recommended for ages 10 and up. So like we said in the beginning of this episode, The Downfall of Pompeii came out in 2004, almost a 20-year-old game, but reprints keep occurring. The most recent one was from 2018, so that might give you some indication of what people think about this game by and large.
Yeah, reprints of a board game are never a bad sign, in my opinion.
Yeah, not at all. So the object of The Downfall of Pompeii is a very simple one. Save the most residents of Pompeii from the destructive forces of Mount Vesuvius.
But before you can save anyone from Vesuvius, you first have to place the residents around town. Then you'll navigate them towards the exits and occasionally throw your opponent's residents into the volcano.
I always thought that was really funny. Like, in order to save them, you first have to place them in harm's way.
Yeah.
Kind of like an ironic twist.
First prepare them for danger.
And then maybe save them from danger, but they might get thrown into a volcano too, so I don't know.
It's a little human sacrifice.
It's like a George Costanza thing when the building was on fire. You just shove everybody down in order to get out. It's kind of what it is when you throw people into a volcano. Anyway, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, to start the game, you're going to lay out your board, and the board represents the entire town of Pompeii. And in the far corner of the board is going to be a little cutout, and this is where you put your volcano. The volcano is kind of like a laminated piece of paper, I think, but it looks enough like a volcano, and you fold it into itself and you stick it in the corner, and you have your town set up. After that, you're going to take all your lava tiles, and you are going to just put them into a bag and set those aside for later use.
Then you need to prepare the deck. And to do that, you follow the instructions in the rule book to organize the cards in a certain way. They're still going to be shuffled, but there's a structure to it.
Once your deck is prepared, you're going to have a couple of stacks of cards left over, and each player is going to choose from those different stacks, and that's going to be your starting hand. Along with your starting hand, you're also going to get a certain number of game tokens, little player pieces. Depending on the number of players you have will depend on the pieces you get, but these are going to represent your residents that you're going to place into the town and eventually help escape.
The game is played in 3 phases. In the first phase, you're populating the city of Pompeii with the residents by playing the resident cards. The resident cards have colors and numbers on them that correspond to different areas of the board. So each turn you play one of these cards, you place a resident in the corresponding space of the board, and then you draw a card.
And players are going to keep doing this, moving through the deck until they draw their first Mount Vesuvius card. Once this card's drawn, Phase 2 begins, and Phase 2 is a lot like Phase 1, except now instead of just placing one piece down at a time, players are going to have the option of placing multiple residents down in a single turn depending on where they put them.
So now you're going to see the population of Pompeii growing exponentially, and the tension is ramping up. And you're also going to start to see what are called omen cards in the deck. And when you draw an omen card, you get to take one of your opponent's pieces and throw it into the volcano. Now, you don't have to do this next part, but it makes it a lot more fun if while you're moving the piece into the volcano, you make screaming, struggling sounds. Ah, no, please don't do it. I'll do anything. I didn't mean to sleep with your wife.
I actually prefer my opponents making those noises while I grab their piece and be like, you die now, and chuck him into the volcano with no mercy.
So for phase 2, you just keep drawing the cards and placing the people and throwing them in volcanoes and making them scream until you hit your second Vesuvius card. And that's when phase 3 begins.
Dun, dun, dun.
Mount Vesuvius is starting to erupt, and the lava's coming down into the town, destroying all of the residents. And you must get them out before it's too late.
Definitely the most chaotic part of the game, for sure.
So in phase 3, you're no longer drawing cards. Now you're drawing lava tiles from the bag that you set aside in the beginning. And when you draw the lava tiles, they each have a symbol in the corner. There's different symbols throughout the board of where the lava flow will start. And so you find the matching symbol, you place the tile either on the symbol or next to one that's already been placed with that symbol. And if there's any pieces in the space that you put the lava tile in, they go into the volcano.
Now, how being hit with pyroclastic flow near the volcano gets you into the volcano, I don't know, but we're not scientists, so who cares? What's more of concern to us is getting the hell out of Dodge, or in this case, I guess, Pompeii. Once you place your lava tile, you now get to move 2 of your pieces, or 1 of your pieces twice, depending on what's going on for you during your turn. And how many spaces your resident gets to move will depend on where they're coming from. So in phase 1 and 2, there were space limitations. You could only have a resident in a building space so long as there was space in that building. In phase 3, it's a free-for-all. It's a madhouse. You can have as many residents in any part of the town as you can fit in there. So if I were to move one of my residents in an area that had 4 pieces, I get to move that resident 4 spaces. But if my resident was the only piece in that space, he's only going to move 1 space.
Yeah, there's definitely strength in numbers in this game. So you're trying to move your pieces towards the various exits throughout the board to get them out of Pompeii before Vesuvius completely erupts all over the place.
Whoa.
And these exits could potentially become blocked by lava tiles before you reach them. So you want to be really strategic about where you're going, and you want to get to those exits as quickly as you can.
The chaos is going to come to a close in one of 3 different ways. Either the last lava tile is drawn from the bag and placed, or all the residents have made it out of the city, there's nobody left, or if all the exits become blocked. If any of those things happen, the game is over. If there happens to be any game pieces left in the city when the game comes to a close, they're fucked. You pick them up and chuck them right into the volcano.
No, please help out!
Exactly.
Now everyone knows the only real winner in this situation was Mount Vesuvius itself, who got to eat himself a delicious feast of poor Pompeians. But for purposes of the game, the winner is going to be whoever was able to rescue the most residents from the city. And if there's a tie for any reason, then you're going to go to the volcano, find out who had the fewest pieces in the volcano, and that person's going to be the winner.
So now that we know how to play, let's talk about how to win. The strategies we have for this game are kind of only like somewhat strategies because there's a lot of random chaos going on in the game, but you can increase your chances somewhat by placing your pieces near exits during phase 1 and 2 and away from the lava symbols whenever at all possible.
Yeah, you really want to think about phase 3 as you're placing your pieces during 1 and 2.
And I definitely want to re-emphasize on the importance of staying away from the lava tile starter spaces if you can. Like, obviously being near the exit's cool, but once you start pulling those things out of the bag, it tends to grow pretty quick. So the further away you can stay from those starting pieces, the better off you're going to be.
And I've definitely seen it happen where the first 3 or 4 tiles that come out of the bag are the same lava symbol. So even just the one space is growing a lot more quickly than you'd expect.
Exactly. You're probably not going to be able to keep all your pieces away, but at least to start the game, I would stay near exits and away from those for sure.
You also want to group your pieces in larger groups with other pieces in the same space. This is really important during the eruption phase. It helps you move around a lot faster. And it also, when you have a lot of opponent pieces in the space that you're in, they're less likely to put a lava tile there because they don't want to sacrifice their own people. So kind of camouflaging yourself in groups of opponent players is a good way to get by unscathed.
Yeah, we forgot to mention earlier that your own pieces are not exempt from your lava tile placement. You can take out your own guys if you want to. Sometimes you have to, but obviously no one is going to make that choice if they can make other choices. So that's why it's important to keep your pieces kind of surrounded by your opponents, because that way they're not going to want to sacrifice that particular space because it'll do more harm to them than it would you.
Another strategy we found to be particularly effective is to create a lane for your pieces to move through towards the exits. And you do this by creating a pathway with what I call anchor pieces. So they're pieces that you're putting in certain spots, and their entire purpose is just to increase the movement of the other pieces as you move them through there towards the exits.
Now, of course, if you notice that your opponent is doing this, you can implement one of my favorite strategies when it comes to this game, and that is to kill your opponent's pieces mercilessly. Show them no mercy as you block their exits, lay lava tiles down all over the place, throw as many of them into the volcano as you possibly can, even if it means sacrificing one or two of your own pieces, because as long as you get more of your guys out than they do, you can afford to lose a few.
Yeah, it's actually, I think, really important not to get too caught up on saving every single piece, because it's just not going to happen.
No.
And if you spend your entire game, take it from me, because this is how he crushed me last time, trying to just avoid danger for each individual piece one at a time, instead of trying to get the most people out as possible, you're going to end up having your exits blocked on you.
Not everyone's going to make it out, and you're going to have to make some tough calls. Some of your pieces are going into the volcano. If it hurts your opponent, well, those are the sacrifices that have to be made sometimes.
Yeah, you just can't get emotionally attached.
Yeah, I've made that mistake before. Oh, God. And again, keep in mind, these strategies are just kind of suggestions because this game can get pretty random. A lot of it does have to do with randomness, so you're just going to kind of have to see what's going on and kind of pick and choose your strategies from there. They're not guaranteed ways to win. These just kind of help you a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's going to depend on who you're playing with, too, because once you've tried one thing with somebody and they catch on, you might have to change things up a little bit.
Right. These are more just kind of like tips that might give you a fighting chance. But once those lava tiles start flowing, you never really know what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, let's be real. When a volcano is erupting, does anyone really have a fighting chance?
Not when you're as close as they were. Now, usually right here we pause for a refill, but there is still beer in my glass this time. We'll talk about why in a few minutes. However, I gotta pee. So while we wait for me to do that, let us take a break from the Downfall of Pompeii to learn a few things about the actual city of Pompeii, as well as the real Mount Vesuvius who destroyed it.
The city of Pompeii today is remembered most as an ancient Roman city, but its history goes as far back as 800 BC, and Mount Vesuvius has been a central part of its entire existence. Due to its rich volcanic soil, Pompeii became an abundant, rich, and thriving city, where all sorts of commerce, trade, tourism, brothels, theaters, and gladiatorial games took place. Beyond the metropolitan center, Pompeii comprised of many different farms, vineyards, and villas that spread far throughout the countryside, including the face of Vesuvius itself. Vesuvius was the center for a few other historical events aside from its infamous eruption in 79 AD. In 73 BC, 150 years before, the legendary escaped slave Spartacus started the Third Servile War when he and his men rappelled down the mountain in a surprise attack against the Roman militia pursuing them. Vesuvius is just one of several different volcanoes along the Campania volcanic arc, which centers around the coast of Naples and stretches as far south as Sicily. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD had been preceded by a massive earthquake 17 years before, and several smaller quakes in the weeks leading up to it. Residents of Pompeii did not heed these warnings, as earthquakes were a regular part of life in the area, and Vesuvius was thought to be extinct. The Vesuvius eruption began around midday. A violent explosion with the force of 100,000 atomic bombs sent hot ash and pumice 9 miles into the stratosphere, turning it essentially into clouds, which blocked out the sun. This material then began raining down on Pompeii and the surrounding areas. This damaged many of the buildings throughout the city as hot clumps of magma ripped through roofs and walls. The volcanic clouds created lightning storms once they hit the stratosphere. The scene on the ground would have been nothing short of an absolute hellish environment, as a burning sky rained down fire onto the residents of Pompeii. A series of pyroclastic flows sealed Pompeii's fate. These are rapid-flowing clouds of hot, toxic gases and volcanic matter that explode out of and descend down the volcano after the initial eruption. The pyroclastic flow was released in a series of surges. These gases reached temperatures of over 500 degrees. Those caught in its path were killed instantly as their blood and organs were flash boiled. Their muscles were frozen rigid due to the shock, and their brain matter turned to glass. Those spared by the heat died more agonizing deaths, as the thick volcanic ash they inhaled cooled and solidified immediately, turning their lungs into bricks. The ash from the pyroclastic surges would be what would bury the city of Pompeii until it was rediscovered in 1748. Although the most well-known, Pompeii was not the only town destroyed in the eruption. The towns of Stabiae, Oplantis, and Herculaneum were all destroyed as well, along with countless other smaller farm communities and outposts. Out of all the areas destroyed, Herculaneum likely suffered the most catastrophic damage and death, despite being relatively forgotten. While we'll never actually know just how many people were killed, the widely accepted death toll ranges around 13,000. This makes the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD the 8th deadliest eruption in human history. The deadliest eruption belongs to Mount Tambora in 1815, which holds an estimated death toll of 200,000. Only one eyewitness account of the eruption survives today. Pliny the Younger, a Roman lawyer and author, was across the Bay of Naples as the volcano erupted and recounted the events 25 years later. His uncle, Pliny the Elder, died in the eruption while using his fleet of ships to try and save people. One of the only men who attempted rescue, Pliny the Elder is credited with the well-known quote for rallying courage, "Fortune favors the brave," although in his case, it did not. Unless you count being remembered eternally throughout history as good fortune, which I guess you could. The mosaic tiles found in Pompeii serve as a fantastic window into what life was like in 79 AD. Mosaics can be found depicting historical events and figures, animals, graffiti, fictional stories, mythical entities, and even the most erotic of body parts, as well as the most provocative, raunchy, and perverted sex pairings and positions you can imagine, and some you probably can't. The so-called bodies we have likely all seen before in shows and images aren't actually bodies at all, at least not anymore. As the dead decayed within the hardened ash and magma, a cavern in the shape of their bodies was left behind. As they were discovered, plaster casts were made to give us the haunting sculptures of people in their final moment of life. While it has been almost 2,000 years since a cataclysmic eruption occurred, Mount Vesuvius is still an active volcano. It most recently erupted in 1944. However, this eruption was severely mild, and many volcanologists and geophysicists predict that Vesuvius will not only have another major eruption, but is actually overdue for one. Despite the active status of such a destructive volcano, Mount Vesuvius is as populated as ever, with around 3 million people living directly around it. With 600,000 of those people living in the danger zone, an eruption similar to the one in 79 AD would undoubtedly become the most horrific volcanic disaster in all of human history.
So that brings us to what we thought about the actual game. This game is kind of fucked up, but it's also really, really fun. I mean, this is an event that really did happen. This really happened to real people. It would be like making an escape game from 9/11 or like a one versus all of Columbine. But I guess because it happened 2,000 years ago, it's all right. I'm not saying I'm offended by it. I just want to point out that tad fucked up, but also really, really fun.
Oh, yeah. It's really fun to throw people into a volcano. I think it helps a little bit that they don't look anything like people. They're little pieces of wood.
Well, that and nobody actually really got thrown into a volcano. So, like, it's not enough like Pompeii to make it think that you're making fun of a group of people or anything like that.
Yeah, it's actually really unrealistic the way that it's done. It's like, the little wooden cylinders, they're not even meatball shaped. The artwork is kind of realistic on the cards, and on the board you have this ancient Rome kind of look, which is really nice aesthetic. But again, like you said, it's not enough like Pompeii, and that non-realism part of it, the kind of cartoony aspects of it, actually allow you to feel like you can have the fun, which I like.
For sure. And I do like the way the game looks. You're right. It looks like it might have been played in ancient Rome, like the color scheme and whatnot. And like it just kind of looks like an old game, which is nice. It's good for the theme, good for the setting.
A lot of those ancient Roman games are or those games within that theme are super hyper realistic,
right?
Which is cool. But if a Pompeii game was hyper realistic like that, you'd probably have weird, icky feelings about people dying in volcanoes and whatnot.
I don't know. 2,000 years might not be a too soon moment.
That's true.
I'd probably still play it. I'm not gonna lie. There's not much I won't play. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I just think it gives us a little bit of whimsy.
It does. I agree. It does. The other thing I like about this game is there's a lot more meat on it than you think, as far as like how to strategize, where you're putting your pieces. Like it looks like a very simple game, and it doesn't come with a lot of pieces, but it does take some thinking. You really got to think where you're going to put your pieces and how you're going to move them as things are happening.
Initially I thought that Phase 1 and Phase 2 even were just kind of a waste of time. Like Phase 3 is where all the meat is at. But it's actually really important how you place your pieces in the first half of the game, because that's going to make a huge impact on getting them out at the end.
Absolutely, especially since there's a lot of chaos in this game. But I think that there's enough chaos mixed in with like strategic movement and placement that it doesn't feel like a totally super structured game, but it also doesn't feel like a chaotic shit show either. I think for me there's a good balance there.
Yeah, and I think that balance makes it really accessible for both new inexperienced gamers and also for old gamers who are just looking to have some fun.
Very true. No matter what your gaming level is, I think you can get something out of this and have a good time doing it. That being said, though, I mean, let's be real. This is not like the game you're bringing to game night. This is not the one everyone's sitting down and like, this is what we came here to play. This is a filler game. This is a warm-up game. This is a wind-down game. If you want something to do after your big game is played, this is a game you bust out to do it with. But that doesn't make it a bad game. There are a lot of filler games out there like that. And for what it is, I think it does what it set out to do, and I think it does it well.
I absolutely agree. But what we didn't like about the game is the $45 price tag. Now, don't get me wrong, we've spent $45 on games before, and even 3 or 4 times that much for certain games. But this one just doesn't really seem to be worth that much.
I don't think so, especially when you consider there are games out there that do essentially what the Downfall of Pompeii does that are $20. One's even like $12, if I remember right, and they do essentially the same thing. It's the one thing about the game that kind of gets me to not want to suggest it to people if they're looking for something like this, because I can, again, introduce you to a game that does essentially the same thing for less.
It's a bummer, though, because it's really fun.
It's fantastically fun. It's got everything you want in a kind of lightweight, take that, we're just kind of messing around type of game, but it's just not worth $45.
Yeah, I mean, the components are nice. They're not, falling apart or anything, but they're nothing to write home about either.
No, not at all. But it's a weird place to be in, because I'm still going to defend this game if somebody has a problem with it. One of the problems that people had online when we were researching the game was that people don't like the randomness of it. And I think the randomness is really part of the theme. I mean, we're talking about a volcanic eruption here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that you see coming, and you don't have a whole lot of time to deal with it or come up with a solution. And so it kind of drives the urgency and the tension.
Agreed. It's actually kind of cool that a game this simplistic is able to add that realistic kind of random chaotic tension while still being really simple and easy to follow. So what people don't like about it, I actually think is one of the better elements of it for the purposes of theme, which I'm a big theme guy anyway, so maybe that's why. I know some people don't really care for theme too much, but I like when the game drives the theme home.
I do too. I definitely like that about the game. And if you want a less chaotic experience, you could always just play it with 2 players instead of 3 or 4.
That's the other thing that I would say is the more players you have, the more the randomness is noticed. If you have just a 2-player game, you can be more strategic about where you put your pieces because there's more space to work. When the lava tiles start coming out in a 2-player game, you draw a lava tile, then your opponent draws one, and then you get to draw one again. If you have a 3 or 4-player game, that's that many more people laying down lava tiles before it's your turn. And so the more players you have, the more random it is, and you'll want to keep that in mind when you're deciding how many people you want to play with, because if randomness isn't your thing, just play with less people.
So for medical reasons, I was not able to try the brew this time. So we're going to do it interview style. Bryce?
Yes, ma'am.
What were you expecting before you tried the Pompeii?
Well, to be honest, I was expecting a typical IPA. I think people who make IPAs now, since there's like a huge IPA craze, they do it wrong a lot of the time. The whole process of making IPAs where you add extra hops at the end of the brew, sometimes it feels, and I do mean feel, like the feel you get in your mouth and the taste you get in your mouth when you drink it. They just threw in the extra hops for the hell of it. Flavor and taste be damned. And so I'm not sure I was expecting it out of this beer, but that's definitely kind of what I have in the back of my mind every time I try an IPA for the first time. Like, shit, this is going to be just hops for the sake of hops.
Okay. And is that what you got?
No, that's not what I got at all. Pompeii Mosaic Hopped India Pale Ale is probably one of the best IPAs I have ever had, hands down. This is a delicious beer. This is an IPA done right, for sure.
Do you normally like IPAs? I mean, when they're not hops for the sake of hops?
They're not my favorite beer, but this beer was too good to pass up for this episode, so we grabbed it. So yeah, normally, no, I don't drink a whole lot of IPAs. I'm more of like an ale, lager, that type of stuff I like the best, but this is amazing. I will say, though, it's a little too sweet for my taste, because, I don't do like a lot of like sweet stuff too much outside of the occasional dessert or whatnot, but from what I can drink of a can of Pompeii, yeah, it's delicious.
So what hints of flavors are you getting in the sweetness? What makes it so sweet?
So this beer is made with pineapple and mango right up front. That's the first thing that hits you. And then the mosaic hops come through with that aroma. You kind of get that smell of like sweetness. And then at the very end of the sip, you get a slight bitterness. But because this is a single hopped IPA, they just used more mosaic hops, so it complements the flavor. And so the bitterness is just kind of there as an afterthought. But it's a nice bitterness that doesn't clash with the sweetness too much. This is a fucking IPA done extremely well.
So I'm looking at it. It looks a little bit sort of cloudy.
Yeah, it's a hazy IPA, which means they don't filter it. Gives it that cloudy look, which I think is pretty appropriate for a Pompeii beer because that pyroclastic flow is just dust and ash and whatever, so it kind of gives you that look.
What about flavor? Does that do anything for the flavor or the texture of the beer?
It doesn't change the flavor or texture too much. It's not an overly carbonated beer, so you get a lot of the flavor right off the bat. My problem with this beer, again, being as sweet as it is, as it gets warmer, and again, this is just for me, as it gets warmer, it becomes harder and harder to drink because that sweetness comes out a little more. If I had to drink this, I would have to drink it really, really fast, and I'm not a fast drinker, but I can't say it enough. This is an absolutely fantastic IPA done correctly, in my opinion, for sure.
Great.
The one thing I will say is it's called Pompeii. I think they were inspired by the mosaic tiles that were discovered in Pompeii, not so much the actual region of Pompeii, because this is a tropical drink. This is a very tropical beer, and I don't think tropics when I think Italy.
Yeah, true.
But with summertime coming up, I would suggest this. This will go good with anything you eat. I really wish you could have tried this, because I think you might have liked it more than... You wouldn't make the face you normally make when you drink beer for the first time.
Yeah, it smells good. It looks like something I might like.
That's the other thing I was going to say. The aroma from the mosaic hops. I know you're not a big floral person, It's not quite floral, but it's like semi-sweet. And so if you drink this like you would drink tea, like you inhale before you take a sip, it really does help. It's amazing.
Yeah, it looks impressive.
I'm drinking it right now as we speak. I'm going to get to about halfway in the glass, and then I just can't no more because it's too sweet. But not everyone is bothered by sweet beers. Like, I just can't do it. But that doesn't mean it's not an excellent beer. This is an excellent, excellent beer.
So if you had to give this beer a rating, 1 to 10, what would you say?
For an IPA, this is almost as good as it gets. I'd be hard-pressed in my beer drinking experience, and I've had a lot of beers. I'd be hard-pressed to find anything better than this in the category of IPA. I'm very nervous about saying 10 because 10 implies perfection and nothing is perfect, but this is like a 9.998.
Wow.
Yeah, this is terrific.
That is really high praise.
You have to at least smell it. Come here.
Okay, all
Come
right.
here. Lean in and smell it.
It smells so summery. It's like light and sort of citrusy, and it's very nice.
If you like IPAs, you're going to like this because it's a different take. It's a single hop, so it's a different take on most IPAs, which do double hop or even sometimes triple hop. If you don't like IPAs, this is definitely one to try because it's going to be a taste of it. If you're not too big on sweet beers, share it because these are tall cans. Other than that, I just can't recommend Pompeii IPA enough. I just really can't. This is fantastic. Hey, it's Bryce here with Just the Tip, brew and mixology suggestions for a better drinking experience. If Pompeii Indian Pale Ale has piqued your interest, I got a great food pairing for you that'll bring out the most of your beer, the Pastrami Spiced Duck Breast Ruben. This savory, adventurous dish will add both complementary and contrasting flavors that will further highlight all of what Pompeii has to offer. Now, of course, you don't have to take my advice. Everyone likes their brews in their own way. That's why this is Just the Tip. To make a pastrami spiced duck breast Ruben, mix together olive oil, black pepper, coriander, salt, paprika, dry mustard, and cayenne pepper before coating the mix all over your cross-hatched duck breast. Set in a bowl, cover in plastic, and let it sit in the fridge overnight. The next day, wipe off excess seasoning and coat with salt before pan frying in oil on medium heat until the skin is crispy. Flip the breast, reduce the heat, and cook for another 5 minutes. Using some of the melted duck fat, heat another pan to medium heat and lightly toast each side of your slices of rye, one with sprinkled cheese on it until crispy. Whip up a slaw made of shredded cabbage and Russian dressing and place it on top of your bread. Slice up your breast and lay it on top of the slaw. Make a mustard dressing by whisking together some olive oil, sherry vinegar, Dijon mustard, salt, and pepper until creamy. Drizzle on your duck breast to taste. Enclose with your second slice of bread and enjoy. If you're like me and you don't like bread too much, just double your portions of everything else and enjoy a near carb-free meal. The heavily spiced flavor of the pastrami seasoning will bring out the spices in your glass of Pompeii. The gamey flavor of the duck itself will add texture to the aroma, and the savory flavors will balance out all that sweetness tremendously. Enjoy this hearty meal and crisp brew on your upcoming pool day, evening barbecue, or maybe even for breakfast. We won't judge you. For more detailed directions, check out this recipe at All Recipes. My name is Bryce, and this has been Just a Tip.
That's all we have for today. We are taking a break next week, but the week after that, we're going to be back and talking about one of our favorite games, Otis. And we'll be pairing it up with an interesting medium dark roast hybrid out of Hawaii called Haze Gray Coffee.
Really looking forward to that combo. As always, give us a like, give us a follow if you find the show to be something of value to you. A 5-star review is also very, very helpful. 5 stars actually is the only number of stars we are willing to accept. And share it with your friends. That's probably what helps us out the most. Until next time, we'll catch you later.
Bye-bye!